Breaking news. We have breaking news. The Tinker case has been decided.
Wait a second. Let's rewind a little bit. The idea of free speech dates all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome. In ancient Greece, all free men were granted the right of free speech. Roman Emperor Tiberius said, quote, "The liberty to speak and think as one pleases is the test of a free country," end quote. When the United States Constitution was drafted on December 15, 1791, it included a Bill of Rights based on the beliefs of our founding fathers and previous civilizations worldwide. Included is the First Amendment, stating that Congress cannot make any law that takes away from our right to free speech and press, assembly, petition, and religious beliefs. Free speech is one of America's most cherished ideas. Armbands, flags, and other forms of protest are all protected by this amendment. Our founding fathers believed free speech was important because it helps to respect human freedoms, allows citizens to express their thoughts, and prevents risk of censorship. The 14th Amendment states no one may create a law that abridges the freedoms given under the First Amendment.
Now let's flash forward a couple of years.
By a few years, do you mean 200?
In 1954, the Vietnam War began when Communist Northern Vietnam invaded Southern Vietnam. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson approved the first deployment of U.S. ground soldiers to Vietnam.
Many citizens wanted to express their negative opinions towards the war, so they protested. The police attempted to stop often disruptive and dangerous protests by breaking them up and arresting protesters. Citizens in Cleveland held a march where people displayed "Get the hell out of Vietnam" signs. A Molotov cocktail bomb was thrown at the Committee for Independent Political Action. Due to all the chaos, the schools in the 1960s were seen as secondary issues. So many were lacking in financial support, they were overcrowded, and the teachers were underpaid. Citizens in the U.S. were going through a time where there was a general distrust and controversy in government and school authorities. Desegregation and the Great Debate caused many problems related to schools. Brown v. Board of Education, which was a Supreme Court case occurring in 1954, helped to put an end to segregation. When the two segregated school districts combined, the schools became overcrowded. Many people were against desegregation, causing arguments in schools. The Great Debate was about what the essential purpose of schools should be. The debate caused unfocused motives of school and led to more power to educate left to the individual school districts. Each school district wanted to speak up to say what they wanted to teach. Most school districts tried to help reduce behavioral issues by focusing on, quote, "the importance of the group, rather than the importance of an individual," unquote, says Charlotte Thompson Iserbite of the subject. This method of reducing issues did not work and only caused people to pick on those who did not fit in, such as Mary Beth Tinker, who was called communist and was threatened for her armband. Mary Beth Tinker and her family grew up on the east side of Des Moines, Iowa. She was the third youngest of 6 children. Her entire family was very involved in protesting and writing to change the world for the better. Tinker's parents encouraged her to stand up for what she believed in, as they did to fight segregation. Her church school taught her to do this in a peaceful manner. Mary Beth Tinker wanted to be brave and stand up for rights that schools across the nation were slowly taking away, like free speech. She devised a plan to wear black armbands, an idea from the Quaker Herbert Hoover, to school to mourn soldiers who had died in the Vietnam War, and in support of Senator Robert Kennedy's proposal to infinitely extend the Christmas Day truce, a temporary truce that occurred in 1914 by the Germans and the British, where soldiers, despite cries from the generals, stopped gunfire and celebrated Christmas together. In early December of the year 1965, Mary Beth, age 13, John, age 15, Paul, age 8, and Hope Tinker, age 11, along with Christopher Eckhart, age 16, and their parents met in the Eckhart home to discuss the wearing of the armbands. On December 16, 1965, all but John Tinker, who wore his armband the next day, was to wear their armbands to school. At first, Mary Beth was afraid to carry out her plans, but she had learned about the Bill of Rights in school and wanted to express her freedom of speech. Unfortunately, the school officials heard about the students' plans and were not at all pleased. They met on December 14, 1965, to discuss what the consequences would be. They issued an order to ban the armbands and said that any student wearing one would be suspended until they could return to school without them because they were seen as a distraction to learning. Regardless, Mary Beth wore her armband to her algebra class at Warren Harding Junior High. When the students wore their armbands to school, the older ones were suspended for wearing them and were told not to return to school until they could do so without the armbands. The older students went home and did not return until after New Year's. The younger Tinkers, Paul and Hope, however, were not suspended, and their elementary school teachers took the bands as an opportunity to educate their classes on the Bill of Rights.
The fathers were furious that their children would be suspended for what they saw as an act protected under the First Amendment. The fathers then sued the Des Moines Independent School District, and the case was taken to the district court. The fathers also requested an injunction to restrain the school districts from making future unfair laws, such as the no armband law.
With the case, the Supreme Court saw current issues with constitutional rights in schools. The students argued that it was unfair to ban the armbands when there were no rules against political campaign buttons and the symbol of Nazism, the Iron Cross. Students also argued that schools should not be able to ban speech based on points of view. The school district counter-argued that actions taken by the school officials were necessary to avoid controversy and the, quote, smooth and efficient functions, unquote, in the classroom. Justice Hugo Black agreed with the schools in that it was inappropriate for the students to express their opinions in schools. The district court dismissed the case, saying that it was in the Board of Education's power to suspend the student in order to protect school discipline, even though there was no evidence of disruption to school activities. When the case moved to the Court of Appeals, the judges said that the student conduct was within the protections in the First Amendment, and the case went on to the Supreme Court. The justices in the Supreme Court stated that the problem does not relate to the length of skirts or the type of clothing. It lies in direct conflict between the First Amendment rights and school rules. The court recognized that wearing armbands was protected under the free speech clause in the First Amendment. Justice Abe Fortas speculated that if the total control were left to the teachers, then the students would be, quote, robotic simpletons, unquote. In addition, the Supreme Court stated that the First Amendment rights excluded the fact that acts may be disruptions to learning. Justice Abe Fortas agreed with the students, saying that, quote, it can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate, unquote. It was also argued that for free expression and free speech to exist, they must apply everywhere, not just in select locations, so they must apply to the bans in schools. These arguments convinced the court to vote in favor of the Tinkers in a 7-2 outcome.
Who sent us postcards with a rifle crosshair on it. I guess their message was that they had us in their rifle crosshair and that they might shoot us. Those people are still around today. Actually, last summer I met up with some of them out in Virginia who were busy fighting against Obama and Obama's health care reform. So groups like that, yes, they threatened us and bullied us. They threw red paint at our house and called us communists when we were actually just Methodists.
Mary Beth is proud to know that her struggles paid off for students nationwide. The Tinker case also set a precedence for future student right cases, proving that rights apply to students too. Judges have instituted a Tinker test that helps determine the limits of free expression in new cases.
Now, judges apply the Tinker test to cyberbullying cases. Now that cyberbullying is a problem, the question arises of whether schools should control students' actions online or if that would violate free speech. For example, Evans, a student, criticized and encouraged other students to criticize fellow classmates and teachers on Facebook. Evans was suspended for 3 days for cyberbullying. He sued the school for violating his free speech rights. Evans lost the case because the judge stated that cyberbullying took free speech too far. This case helped to tie loose ends by restricting how far free speech can be taken.
The Tinker versus Des Moines debate has sparked a successful era for student rights.